All right, I'm gonna say it. I hate when Jesus uses the word hate. It makes things really complicated. And today's readings are anything but easy to understand. In the reading we just heard from Luke, Jesus says, "No one can follow me without giving up their possessions." And then he adds, "Whoever doesn't carry the cross and follow me can't be my disciple." Paul, in his letter to Philemon, says, "Take back Onesimus as a brother, not as a slave." And then in the reading for Genesis, which we didn't use, Moses says to the followers, "Choose life and prosperity over death and adversity." I don't know about you, but that's pretty complicated, because I love my possessions. I like having a house. I like having a car. I like having clothing. I like having food on my table. Those are all possessions that, if we take Jesus word for word, we shouldn't have. We should rely upon others to help us. If you think about what the weight of the cross is, and Jesus is saying, well, you need to carry that. Well, again, this is just me being greedy probably, and that's one of the 7 sins, and that's not good. But a cross is a heavy thing, and that can be hard to carry for your lifetime. And don't even get me started with taking someone back as a brother instead of a slave, because we all know slavery is wrong. And Moses had just received the 10 Commandments, and he's sitting there going, you need to make a choice. You need to choose to follow the 10 Commandments, which will be life and prosperity over death and adversity, because if you don't follow the commandments, you are not following God. That's really pretty complicated. But then we really need to look at words. And when we start looking deeper at the words of Jesus, it begins to be a bit more understandable. Because we all know, I hope, Jesus didn't speak English. So you have to go back to look at what it was written in, which is Greek, which isn't even really what Jesus was speaking, because he would have spoken Aramaic. So we're hearing Jesus translated through 3 different languages umpteen million times. But if you look at the Greek, the word that is translated as hate is not hate as we know it today. In Jesus' time, the word is a word that calls somebody to make a moral choice, as it implies not so much a negative feeling, but as a perceived value. So in other words, Jesus was not saying to his disciples, or to us, to be a brat and don't listen to your parents and hate them and not want to be with them, or to carelessly throw away our lives. But rather, he was saying to be a follower of Jesus means elevating the way of life that we live above everything else. He was saying to make the tough choices. Now, what Jesus is asking us is to live our life, but live it his way, which isn't easy. But I think we've all learned that nothing Jesus says is really easy if you take it and do what he asks. Which is really good, because then we're going backwards today, and we're looking at Jeremiah then. And Jeremiah really helps, because in Jeremiah we have this wonderful metaphor for change. If you've ever watched a master potter work, you know they make it look really easy. This wheel is spinning, and they've got their foot figuring out how fast it's supposed to go, and out of this ball of clay becomes this beautiful piece of art. I can tell you, it's not that easy. I've tried it. You don't want to see the works I created. But once in a while, that beauty doesn't happen, even with a master potter. And the potter has to destroy or punch down that piece and put it back into a ball and start again. And that's the metaphor that I really want to look at. Because we are the ball of clay, and God is the potter. Jesus is asking us to modify the manner in which we live our lives, with God the potter there to help us along. Jesus isn't saying that we have to do this by ourselves, because God's hands are molding us, helping us to become more balanced, opening ourselves up like the top of a pitcher. It is through the work of God's hands that we're created. So even as we sit here or stand here today, God's hands are still at work molding us. We are never a finished product. But it is also through God's hands, the potter's hands, that the work of art is destroyed, because it isn't right. And like a potter, God also can destroy. Think of the story of Noah's Ark. In the story, creation had gone astray, and God told Noah to create the ark so that he would be saved. Because sometimes the potter doesn't destroy the entire creation. They keep it, and they begin to mold again. And out of Noah, creation was remolded. We are that creation. We aren't always perfect. Okay, maybe you're perfect. I know I'm not perfect. But God and Jesus know that. And like an artist sometimes keeps their imperfect works, God keeps his imperfect works as well. And for that reason, God sent us a role model in Jesus, so that we would have an example of how we are to live our lives. Because we all know it's easier to fashion our lives after something than try to create it from scratch. And we are then called to make the tough decisions that are countercultural. We are to love people as equals, no questions asked. We are to carry the burden of the cross as he did, knowing that living a life carrying the cross will cost us. Just this morning in Rome, Mother Teresa was beatified, a saint. She was an example of someone who truly, in the original Jesus person, purpose, hated the world. She made a moral choice every day to live above the culture. She raised up the untouchables in the Indian caste system and treated them as equals. For us, you may ask, what does it mean for us to live that moral life, to make those moral decisions? And I'll just give you one example. When you go grocery shopping, do you think about how the food you are buying was produced or grown? Or whose hands picked that fruit or vegetables? Because in our society, we want cheap. We want inexpensive. We buy what's on sale. Notice I'm using we, not you. I am as guilty about this as everyone else. But yet, if you look at the wages those employees are paid to pick those vegetables and fruit, they are not paid a living wage.